Hi, my name is Keith Cooper of Northlight Images. This is a review of the TTArtisan 17mm f4 Tilt-Shift lens. Now this particular lens, I've done some videos introducing it, showing some of the features and things, and I've been testing it, and I will include comparison to some extent with this, the Canon TS-E17, which I've used for many years as part of my architectural work. This particular lens, I'll show some details about the lens, I'll show how general performance, a load of examples, have a look at the timeline in the notes to this, and then you can jump forward to bits that are relevant to you. I'll also have a look at some of its limitations as well, because this is the G-mount version of the lens. This is for Fuji GFX, so it's medium format, and I've got plus or minus 8mm of shift. Now, this has also got tilt on it as well. But the difference between this and most other tilt-shift lenses that I've ever looked at is this is limited. There is no lens mount movement on it. So you are limited to shift that direction, or rise and fall as it was known, in this orientation, so landscape orientation. If you have the camera in portrait orientation, you're limited to left-right shift. And that could be quite limiting, or it might not matter. Now, I'll show some of the examples as to how I've used it, but in general, for such a wide angle lens as this, and it's equivalent to about a 13mm lens on 35mm, this is a very wide lens, and I found that most of the use I would get of something like this is indeed rise and fall. The tilt, well, it's not something I tend to use very much, but I will show some examples, a couple of examples of using tilt and how it does work. Could enable some interesting effects if you're interested in it. As well as that, basic construction, a few other bits and pieces, yeah, sort of stuff you'd expect from a lens review. I will not have detailed test charts showing resolving power and all this sort of stuff like that. That's for somebody else who's got far more spare time than I have to do it. Such stuff like that I find immensely tedious to actually do. This is probably the real reason I include it, but more to the point, I'm interested in what I can do with the lens. How can I actually use it? Incidentally, this lens is also available in mirrorless mounts, E mount, Z mount, RF mount, where you do get the ability to rotate the lens on the mount, and that allows you to have shift in any direction, tilt in any direction. The tilt and shift are set at 90 degrees to each other, which might be an issue for some users, but in general, tilt on something this wide, you don't tend to use it. If you were thinking of using tilt for landscape because it allows you to get stuff very close and very far, yes, it does to some extent, but I'm still lack general examples of where that's useful on cameras this size. Useful on large format cameras, things like the big 5x4 that I've got sitting here, but less so I find on smaller cameras like this. You might have uses for it. If you have got uses for it, then you're going to find you can't do it with this particular lens because of the movements on it. But it is a solidly built lens. It's all metal. There may be some plastic somewhere, but it's not very obvious. Most of it seems well machined metal. It's solid. The focus throw is perhaps 90 degrees, 100 degrees or so, so not big. It does have a hard end stop at infinity, which is unusual for some tilt-shift lenses, certainly on the Canon one that I've got here. This is the TS-E17, by the way, which I've had since 2009. So that one you can focus past infinity. Now that's for use with tilt, where it is a useful feature. Tilt on this perhaps less useful. You're not going to be able to use this for the standard sort of miniature world look. It's too wide anyway. But you know, apart gimmicks like that, that's not really what tilt's for myself. I mean, if you find it useful, by all means. TTArtisan do a 50mm tilt only lens, which I thought was singularly useless when I first got to look at it, but actually I've had uses for it, and I've got a review of that as well. But anyway, I say it's smooth movement. It is a clicked aperture at half stops, so 4 something, 5 6 something, 8 11 16. So there are, yeah, there's a clickable stop, and you can't remove the clicks if you're interested. Aperture wise, the lens has got a 10 blade aperture. which gives sun stars, and you'll see that in some of the examples from some of the night photos I've got. It does give sun stars of that, but they're not overly prominent. If you want prominent sun stars, look for a lens with fewer aperture blades. That really emphasizes it. Or if you don't want sun stars, look for something in general with more aperture blades. So that's it. In terms of the physical movements, it comes with a lens hood, which may vignette slightly at full shift. The shift on the medium format version is limited to ±8 millimeters because it's got to cover the whole sensor, and on the small, on the 35mm version, it does 12 millimeters of shift. Now 12 millimeters of shift happens to be the same as what the TS-E does here, and I've got an example that shows the difference between this at full shift and that at full shift. It's not that much because it is so wide that you're getting massive distortions just for, you know, normal rectilinear projection style distortions on it. Now, lens front element protrudes like that. There is a lens hood, a lens cap that goes over it, locks in place like that. You can't have this and this on at the same time. I would keep this on to protect the front element. Coatings seem very reliable, but it does show some examples of flare, and I'll come back to that. I've got a couple of examples of flare, veiling and stuff. Basically, keep strong sources of light from shining on the front element here, because that will produce sort of various effects, usually unwanted effects. So in terms of the tilt and shift, they are lockable. Don't over tighten the locks. Once you undo the locks, the movements are actually physically moving the lens. There's no rack and pinion or anything like that, so you can't do small scale adjustments. I don't find that much of a problem. So I've got that there. There we go. That's full shift. That's full shift down. I find it quite easy to use. Now, I used this on a tripod with an L bracket here. This is a Rigetti L bracket, and I used it with that. No problem using it at all. So in general, this lens you are going to be using, if you take a lot of photographs this way up, you're going to be using it with shift, or not at all, just use it as a wide angle. It is actually very good quality. Now, I've got some examples which show some of the relatively minor distortions of the lens, but yeah, in general, it's a nice solid lens to use. You don't get the refinements of movements that you get in this, but if I remember rightly, when I bought this brand new, it was well over a couple of £1,000. This one is much, much cheaper. Optically, now, it may well be, and I now know that I definitely need to get this one serviced. In terms of overall image sharpness, this one hammered this one. Now, I didn't think the difference should be quite so pronounced, so I'm going to send this one. It may have had a bounce when it was moved over. We've moved house recently, and although stuff was packed away, well, you can never tell what happened. Some stuff I brought over, but some stuff was packed away in bags in boxes with bubble wrap. Could have been bounced a bit. My expensive lenses, like my Fuji 30mm Tilt-Shift, that came over in a camera bag with me moving it, not left to the movers, but maybe that was, yeah, we shall see. Yeah, if I do send this one away and it does turn out to be a problem with this lens, I will update some of the comparisons with it, because I don't think it's fair to go to compare a brand new lens with one that's from 2009 and may well have recently been knocked slightly out of alignment. This one at the moment only really works with a few millimeters of shift on here. Even on the if I put it on the R5 with an adapter, it still only works ideally with a few millimeters of shift, which is not as I recall it. I've used this for years for my work. This particular picture at the back here was taken with a TS-E17, so you know it should be better. Anyway, back to this one here, examples and bits of it. Let's say it's solid, but then it's medium format. You're going to notice the weight a bit more on a smaller, lighter body. If you get the version of it, which is slightly longer, if you get the version for RF Z mount and something like that, it is extended out the back. In fact, it's because of the shorter flange distance for those particular mirrorless cameras that there is space to put the ability to rotate the lens on the mount, which is important because at the moment you're limited to shift like that. I quite often, for wide lenses, maybe want to do shift like that, or even like that. Now, some people say, but I want to shift left and right so I can stitch images together. In general, at this short focal length, the extension that you get sideways is, you've got wide angle already. And quite often for wide angle shots, if I'm stitching to make wide panoramics, I much prefer to actually rotate the camera like that, this way up, and then stitch that way and do the correction afterwards in software. I find the image quality towards the edges of wide panoramic shots is better. That's something I found through using this one a lot, and it wouldn't be any different for this. But anyway, let's have a look at some examples of using it. First up, a shot with no shift. This is just to give a feeling for how wide angle it is, and I will step through these. There are 5. I've used the whole number apertures, as it were, and it steps from f4 to f16. This is just looking at quality. Brick walls, flat surface. This shows up any field curvature, shows up any vignetting. In looking at this, and I will compare this with the other TS-E17 at point, so you can see the distortions are minimal. However, a subject like this is where you can see them the most. There is at f4, there is a general vignetting. You get that on any lens. It's basic optics, but how much it's noticeable does vary. So in this, there is a distinct fall off towards the corners. But interestingly enough, it doesn't drop off that much as you go up through the apertures. So this is at 4. And I can see from here, from the building, there is overall a slight barrel distortion visible. Now, that's easily correctable, but you're not going to be able to correct that automatically because there is no lens EXIF data. There is no electronics in this lens. So the camera doesn't know what lens is fitted. Now, in using this, certainly for the nighttime shots I use later, I was using the image stabilization in this. I'd set the image stabilization to tell the camera that there was a 17mm lens attached. You can do that with this. You can have a collection of lenses. You can swap between various manual lenses. Most cameras like this will allow you to set the nominal focal length. Now, I've set it to 17 and it worked fine, and I took lots of shots handheld. These are with a tripod, but I have in the examples used handheld quite a lot. But I can see from looking at this that there is a slight barrel distortion, but it's very little. You would need to correct it manually. And the other thing is, if you shift, there is nothing in the EXIF saying how much shift has been applied. Now, the only lens that I know that does that, that I use, is the Fuji 30mm Tilt-Shift. And that is many times the cost of this, and it's a phenomenal lens, but then again, for that much money I want it to be a phenomenal lens. This is for quality wise, for what you pay. Now, there may be some showstoppers for you in terms of its limitations, but in terms of image quality itself, not many. Now, looking at that's at f4. Go up. Unfortunately, the light wasn't perfect this day, so I was out a little slight sunniness, but yeah, there's very little difference as I step between them. The vignetting in particular doesn't change much. Remember that one of the things is that a lens like this has a very big image circle. Now, that's the image projected behind the lens, which is where the sensor is. It's a big image circle, so that if you move the lens, the image circle, still the sensor falls in it. That's why it's limited to 8mm of shift here and 12mm of shift for 35mm. Because a smaller sensor, you can move the lens more. It is identical. It is equivalent to just moving the sensor up and down as well. But you can get more for that. Now, in looking at those, no problem. What about when I add shift? We're now shifted fully upwards. This is 8mm of shift, or rise as it's sometimes known, and the distortion hasn't changed. It seems a fairly even barrel distortion. There's no awkward bits about it where it goes from a combination to pincushion to barrel or moustache style distortion. It looks pretty good and it's nice and sharp. This is at f4 and I'm seeing very little fall off in quality towards this corner here. Now if I go down through the images, I can see on this screen it's getting a little sharper. We go down, we go to 22. By the time I get, sorry, not 22, it's only 16 on this one. By the time we get to 16, I can see the image softening from diffraction. In fact, I can see it slight softening at 11. 8 gives you good depth of field and detail. In fact, if you're not shifting much, I found the lens performed really well at 5.6. If you do a lot of shift, as it is here, then the corner qualities are slightly better at 8 than they were at 5.6. The middle's better at 5.6. Yeah, it's what you'd expect basically from looking at the MTF chart for it. Remember though, MTF charts are as much about marketing as anything else. Yes, they are accurate, they don't show stuff that isn't there, but what they actually mean, so you can't compare a Canon MTF chart and say one from another manufacturer and looking at it and go, oh well, this one's clearly better, because they are different things. So always be wary of that. But that's just looking at those. So in terms of you know, the fall off from the vignetting, easily controlled. You can fix this if it's a problem. You use an offset approach for it. Now I mentioned this, I've written a book, lots of articles on using tilt-shift lenses, and that includes ways of doing this manually. Now, ideally, you would know how much shift you've used, but there are ways around it. It involves extending the canvas, doing this in Photoshop, extending the canvas so that what is the midpoint where the lens is, or the camera is pointing, is now in the middle of the canvas, and then you just use the vignetting tools and it fixes it. So I'll put a link to an article I wrote some time ago looking at the process of this, but I've got it in the book as well, which covers just about everything I could think of using tilt and shift lenses. And if you did all the things, that's where some of the limitations of this one comes through, because I use these lenses a lot. But anyway, that is just looking at the basics of the lens. Now let's have a quick look at some examples that I've got here, and obviously I'll cut these into the video as well so you can see them a bit better. But remember, these are 100 megapixel images. Focusing with this, focus peaking helps. Focus peaking is very useful if you want to use the tilt, because it makes it where the plane of focuses show up really well at f4. But here, in terms of this has got just a little bit of vertical shift just to correct the composition. The idea is, as with any shift lenses, is that you take with a wide angle lens, or any lens like this, you keep the camera level, and verticals, and I did say I'm an architectural photographer, this here is not far from where this picture here is. I want the building like that. I don't want it looking like that. Tip your camera upwards and it does that convergence effect. Keep your camera level and shift the lens upwards and you get a shot like this. Now, as ever, it's 17 millimeters on a bigger sensor, so it's equivalent to about 13, 14. You need to pay a lot of attention to foreground, all sorts of things. Compositionally, it can be quite tricky getting the hang of wide lenses like this. Get it right and you will get some superb looking images. Get it wrong and it's painfully obvious that you've got it wrong. And the only way that I know to get better at doing this is just go out and try it. After all, I've been doing this for long enough that using sort of shift for something like this is second nature, to the point that if I'm using an ordinary camera, I keep thinking, where's the shift? Oh, there's no shift. You get used to using it, just as a matter of fact. So there we go. Nice bright day. No problems here. The sun wasn't on the lens itself. There's no difficulties there. I've moved not very far, and now because I've got stuff closer to me, you get much more dynamic composition to it. Whether things like this work, you just have to take lots of pictures, because with the juxtaposition of near and far objects like that, just slight movements of the camera up, down, as well as different locations and forwards, backwards, can make quite a real difference to how things look. Straight on, looking at this. Now, I'm looking at this, and I can never be entirely certain since I'm wearing glasses at the moment, whether the curvature, how much is introduced by this. There is an ever so slight bowing of that vertical. In normal use, and my shadow, that's the other problem. There's just a bit of my shadow in here as well. And now I've tried to arrange my shadow so it's on a dark feature on the ground, but if this was, for a client, I would probably in Photoshop make sure to remove my shadow there and make sure that it's not difficult to do with an adjustment layer. But anyway, looking at this, we've got that slight bowing, which comes from the very slight barrel distortion we've got. If that was a nuisance, you could get rid of it for this. There's not much, there's just a few millimeters of rise. As I say, you've got no way of knowing how many millimeters of rise, because, in fact, not even for a lens like this, because there's no EXIF data. And even when you do have the EXIF data, such as for the Fuji lens, at the moment nothing particularly makes use of it apart from Capture One, and I never greatly liked Capture One for that, and just that one thing is not enough for me to get over my general sort of dislike of the software. I know people use it a lot, much like Lightroom. It's personal choice. What works for you, what works for the sort of stuff you do. Now I'm a lot closer now, and you can see that by playing around and moving about, you can play and you can emphasize strong angles, you can do all sorts of stuff. Some of my architectural clients love this sort of stuff. Some of them would much prefer that I was further back and used a longer lens to give a different apparent perspective. But that's just with shift, and another one that's, you'll have seen these buildings quite often. They go near where I used to live, still not far away, but I just use it quite often when I'm testing stuff. Now, you can make any building like this with an edge look really dynamic. It changes its position, you can move slightly, but and sometimes I will leave people in. If people are cycling past, I'll take 2 or 3 shots as they cycle past and then have a look to see which one looks best afterwards, or even one without them. Depends on what the client wants and things. I don't necessarily want people in my pictures quite often, but when I do want people in the pictures, I don't want them distracting from what I'm trying to show. Fortunately, people move, so just take more pictures or they'll be replaced by other people in due course. Now, close up to this one here, that looks, it's a fairly sort of wide lens. If I go slightly closer and move the camera, it's changed again. Quite a difference in relative perspective for things. But it just goes back to say, you use a lens like this, it is foremost a wide lens. Secondarily, it has that ability to shift. Now, in taking shots like this, I wish it had an ability to shift diagonally, because that's useful as well. But as I've covered that in various other videos and things, but it doesn't. It is what it is. They go a little bit closer. The whole relative sizes of things changes quite a bit. Coming around looking at this building, this one with when you look at it like this with a really wide view, the view of it makes the building look a lot less deep than it probably is. So I would prefer for this one a not so wide lens and further back. This one just gives it a feel that it doesn't necessarily have when you're there. Although remember, if this is the view the camera captures, this is what you would see if you were standing there. There's nothing special about that. There's nothing there. But of course, you wouldn't just look in one point. You would move around. Your gaze would shift. So your perception of how something looks varies from that. Now, another straight one, single point perspective. This one shows really how wide the lens is on the GFX here, because to take this particular picture before, I've needed to stitch pictures and do various things and use very wide lenses. Incidentally, this one taken quite a bit of vertical shift. Once again, as I say, you see the buildings are straight. There is a feature, an aerial or something, or camera or something up on the top of this building there. And I often use that as a check of the aberrations of the lens and things. And there is virtually no chromatic aberration whatsoever. Even, and I haven't got any nighttime shots, any star shots of this. We've had pretty dreadful weather for the last few weeks. I haven't really got out and done any, but yeah, it looks pretty good in the way it handles, you know, small sources of detail. In fact, the amount of detail on this, I took the same shot using this one here and it looked dreadful. And this is the point which I'm thinking, yeah, there's maybe something wrong with this particular lens. But yeah, it looks great. That's a picture which I would prefer in different weather, perhaps. And if I'm I might crop out some of this foreground here. But yeah, it's all about what picture works. And there's the man on the bicycle. As I say, sometimes there's a couple of people walking past, but there's a man on the bicycle. The other thing you'll notice is how the clouds move, and how with very wide angle lenses, particularly shifted like that, so it's equivalent of an even wider lens, even slight movements of clouds can change a lot how they look in it. So for this, if you've got an active sky like this, then wait around for 5 minutes and take pictures with slightly different arrangements of clouds, and you may find one works much better than another. Not guaranteed, but I never come back from a job thinking, oh, I wish I'd taken less photos. It's just a mix, and it also helps, gives the clients something to think about, because when it comes down to it, I can take pictures I like, and I hope that the pictures that I like taking for this are ones that match up with what the client needs. But I always talk with them, and they might go, I don't want any people in this picture, I don't want a picture. They might not want this single point projection, which is a particular viewpoint, because I'm square onto the building. So horizontals are all horizontal, and then you've got this very strong line here from the top of the tall building. Once again, as I say, shadows, strong lines, play around with them, different view. Notice there, much more emphasis on the diagonals there. For the next one, these very strong signs here make it, but you do still have a very strong line heading over there. Now, for more traditional in buildings, the amount you can get in a street scene, even in relatively narrow streets like you've got in much of the UK, you can capture with a lens like this a lot of a building. If I wanted to get views of this building, I need wide angles. Even using the 17 here, as I used to use this one on my Canon 5DS, and I do still use it on the R5 occasionally, but in looking at this, that would be tricky to get with this. Put it on the medium format, you've got that extra coverage. It may work, it may not work. Just because you can take a picture doesn't necessarily mean it's the right lens choice and that you should. But for one like this, that gives a nice feel for the street layout. Now a few nighttime shots. Now you'll have seen some of these in my quick overview of the lens I did a month or so ago, but they're very good for for nighttime shots. These are all handheld, by the way. So using the image stabilization, the ISO was up at say 3200 on this, and the images were pre-processed with DxO Pure Raw, which handles noise reduction really well. Exports them as DNGs, which you can then process. Normally I might do them in Camera Raw just to play around with them in Photoshop. But here we see the sun stars, the lighting. Yeah, it all works very nicely. This is a theatre here in Leicester called Curve. No prizes for guessing why it's called Curve. But I've photographed this, since whilst it was being built. I've actually was involved in some of the construction photography for this building. So I've got pictures when it's just a hole in the ground. Quite a deep hole actually. But so I've seen what goes in the internal structure of it. But it just looks nice. The colours, the bright colours here. There's no obvious veiling, flare and things. Yes, there's the sun stars, not a big problem. Once another nighttime shot of the clock tower at Leicester. This is, for the angle of this has come out very well. This lens works nicely on this camera at night, when I just want wide angle shots of stuff. And the fact that I can do it handheld as well and get detail in it, the lens is good, but obviously the cameras, modern cameras, are much better. If I'd used this on the R5, for example, if I had the version for that, I wouldn't have quite the wide coverage, but yeah, I could still go out and use it. There we go, very bright sun, stars. The fact that it had rained earlier, if you're going out at night and taking pictures of streets, if it's rained, yeah, the shininess of the pavement and things, that really, yeah, could just make a nice difference. One bemused security guard wondering why I'm standing there, but then that's the job of security guards I found in shopping centres. Yeah, the KFC. Yeah, somebody did say this picture when they saw it before, how have I managed to look at it, make a KFC look appealing? Well, you know, make your own choices, but I've exposed this to make sure it didn't overexpose inside, and I've really done that. And then I've used the processing, and knowing that I can pull up the shadows a lot with a sensor on this, been able to get some detail into the rest of what you can see there. Lit shopping centre, vertical shift again, so the camera is level, gives that very strong lines with all the lit bits there. Top of an escalator, just as I was walking up it, yeah, just a view of, well, of stuff. I was just walking back through town. I'd been to an event and was walking back to where I'd parked my car, and so I took this with me, just thought, oh, I know there's lots of nice brightly lit bits on the way back, see what we get. Yeah, there's another walkway over towards where the car park is. The wide angle and the shift lets you, if you want, make very strong use of shapes and things, and in architectural photography that can really help. Not always, sometimes you want dull, plain, boring, just flat on, but sometimes you want something just to give it a bit of zing. Nighttime shot here, the lighting here has been handled really well. There's detail right up to the top. As I found in those pictures of the car park with the brick wall on it, the detail in the corners is very good on this. These were shot at f8 because I wasn't sure of the qualities of the lens. I could comfortably have shot these at f5.6 and not lost much detail in the corners, but f8 seems to be a pretty good setting for this lens. Another one here with some lights at the top here. Now these little LED lights in this picture here suggests, and as I haven't been able to try it, suggests that this lens would actually be quite good for star photos. Not sure necessarily that the shift would be the slightest use whatsoever. Now, a few examples of sort of defects and things in the lens. I say defects, most aberrations and things are part of the compromises that you make when you design lenses. Lens design, one of the reasons lens design has advanced so much in recent years is that it's always compromise. Whatever features you want in a lens, you always, if you make one better, something else gets worse. The ways round it, the lens design gets more complex, at which point the actual working out what it's going to be without making example lenses becomes very difficult and expensive and time consuming. Computer design software now has got a lot better for lenses, and there are some new glasses available now which are much better. So for example, when you see aspheric optics, that's molded optics and things. It's some of the things you can do in lenses now you couldn't do when this was designed, and some of the things that when this was designed you couldn't do 10 years before that. So in the last 20 years or so, lens design has come on an awful lot in terms of what's capable. But still, this one here, this particular shot, what we've got is there is an overhead light, a street light, and that light is hitting this front element here, because remember it sticks out a little bit. You could put the lens hood on, but I just wanted to see what it was like with this, and you can see, yes, there's that flare, there's that veiling, it's not so good. I just move forward a foot so the light is not shining on the lens, and there you go, it's much better. There are still, if you look carefully, you can see some issues, some slight bits from the other bright light sources. Likewise here, if you look carefully, there are a few little bits of flare and things. The day I see a lens like this that doesn't have bits of flare and things in it, is when I'll think people that it's not a real image. Real lenses do this sort of stuff. Is that a problem? I think not. Now, daytime shot. This is one of the ones that I showed earlier. You'll notice in the corner, from the 10-sided aperture, you'll notice a very nice distinct bit of lens flare. That's just because the sun is just catching the front element here. As simple as not putting the hood on it, but just putting my hand nearby. And you do need to check that because it's such a wide angle, that you've not got your hand in the corner of the frame or something, and lo and behold, it's gone. It's as simple as that. Yeah, but there it is. You can see the clouds have moved. That's the time difference between me doing that and taking the next shot. So that shows that quite nicely. And in general, is it a problem? No, as long as you're aware it's there. Now, I did say I'd mentioned lens tilt. Yeah, the lens tilts. There we go. There it is. It's tilted. And there it is, tilted back the other way. As I said, there's no gearing on it, so it really is a matter of doing that. There is a slight detent at when it's at 0, and it does well to tighten it up. But with all of these lenses, never over tighten these settings here. It damages so many lenses, and I know from people who rent out lenses, the biggest failing for lenses like this is people over tightening stuff and damaging it. It's very easy to do, and a repair to that mechanism here often involves replacing large chunks of the lens if it's still available. Remember, that's a 2009 lens. It is current, but it is a 2009 lens. Now, tilt. Obviously, I can just tilt the lens that way, that way. If I tilt the lens, and this is across to the left, the focal plane, as I tilt the lens like that, the focal plane will run about this far away from the lens. Hence, I'm right by the wall here. I'm not quite close enough. So we've got the wall sharp, and this is with the lens set at infinity. The focal plane is a flat plane that just runs out like that. So that's the focal plane with it set like that. Tilt it the other way, and the focal plane runs like that. That's at infinity. If I change the focus setting, what happens is that plane, if it's on this side, will start to swing across like that. If I've got it this way, focal plane at infinity is like that. And then as I change the focus setting, the focal plane will move like that. So I can move the focal plane that angle or vice versa on the other side. So that's how I use that. This shot here, this is at F4 to emphasize the out of focus areas. We can see at F4, I've got the lens, I've got the view sharp right into the distance. And you can see typical out of focus. Incidentally, with strong tilt, the look of out of focus areas tends to be slightly different on one side of the lens to the other side of the lens. Now, there's no vignetting on this. I haven't tried this with shift. You could do it. Normally, if I use tilt on a lens this wide, it's because I'm in a confined space and I want a picture along a wall or something like that. I have tables covered in the book and articles on how to set these settings here, how to guess the amount of tilt if you want the plane running at a certain distance beside the camera. At full tilt, it may be that much beside the camera. At 5 degrees of tilt, it may be that much, and so on. So you set it that way. But that's dead straight. The other example I've got is this time I've changed the focus and I've swung the plane of focus around to run through that lamppost. And there we go. I see a guy walking along, and I've got the shot just as he's walked past the lamppost because I know the plane of focus is running there. Of course, I also have a lamppost now growing out of his head, so perhaps not ideal for it, but this is only really just intended to show you what can be done. And you can see now that plane of sharp focus running diagonally across the scene. You see the building behind is in sharp focus, he's in focus, the lamppost in focus, the ground in front of me is in focus, all on that plane. So that's how tilt works on it. What would I use tilt? As I say, maybe I would use tilt to run a picture along a side of a wall. Certainly have done with this one here. In general though, the use of tilt for getting all of a landscape in focus is massively overrated on cameras like this. People buy tilt shift lenses, thinking of what they can do with tilt, and then discovering that reality is quite different to what they had imagined. There are lots of things you can do with tilt, but when it comes down to it, you are limited to some extent by what's physically capable with the lens. Now, I've got the big 5x4 here, that's got movements, I can move stuff all over the place. Much more flexible, but so cumbersome to use that I'd never use it for serious work or anything like that. Yes, it is a prop almost, but yeah, that's what tilt can do. So yeah, you've got it, but on this camera, you're limited to just left, right, or swing of the lens. Is that useful? Come back to that when I actually sort of discuss in a minute what the lens is good for and what it's not good for. Now, I did say I'd do a quick comparison between this and the Canon TS-E17. The TS-E, with the proviso that this one, as I know from this testing thing, there may be something a bit iffy with this. Anywhere apart from the centre, towards the corners, it was really soft. Now, this is a straightforward shot looking forward, F4, and I'll just compare it with the shot from the TS-E17 with the camera mounted exactly the same way but with no shift. And if I do that, we can see that the corners are brighter. If I go back again, we can see some of the vignetting I mentioned. We can also see, when I swap between them, that the barrel distortion, and it is slight, you don't notice it normally, it is that low. The barrel distortion makes it look like the picture is bulging outwards. And the way to do that is if I just swap between them, you'll see it. The field of view of the 17 here is slightly wider than 17. Remember, focal lengths on lenses always have a margin of error, and for wide angle lenses the margin of error is more strongly on the being slightly, the number millimeters focus being slightly wider than the actual lens is. You're selling a wide lens, well, there you go. So that's, those, I can see the difference on that. Hopefully it shows. How much do you notice that in actual photos? Well, unless it's something like this, which is really obvious, you don't tend to notice it. And certainly for most shots, certainly the nighttime ones, loads of other ones there, the vignetting and stuff was not a problem. And as I say, this was at F4. Take it down to 5.6, the vignetting's less. Take it down to 8, it's a little bit less still. And it's not a great problem. Now, what happens if I go shifted upwards? Now, shifted upwards, I can see a slight bit of that barrel distortion along the top line there. Yeah, it's there. The vignetting is slightly more because it's off axis and we're shifted, so we're seeing towards the edges of the image circle. So there's a little bit of darkening there. Is this fixable? Easily. Is it automatically fixable? No. And that's one of the things you have to think about with a lens like this that is fully manual. So it's that. Incidentally, I mentioned that this has got a movement of 8mm, plus minus 8mm, 12 on the 35mm version of it. This TS-E17 has the 12mm of movement. And how much difference does it make? That's at 8mm. Oops, get the right way. That's at 8mm, and that's at 12mm. So you can see, yes, we get a bit more shift on it at 12mm. The problem is you're so close to the edge of the image circle with the 17 here that this is soft as anything. Now you could probably even see it on the example shown on the video here. It's that bad. Suffice to say that if I was using the 17 on this one, I would only be using a few millimeters of shift. But that's how much 12mm is. That's how much 8mm is. For a lens like this, it really doesn't make a lot of difference. Yes, it is. Is it a problem for you? Well, maybe or maybe not. Incidentally, I mentioned about how good this is in the corners. This is 100% view of the corner, one of the top corners of the building. And having seen an awful lot of shift lenses over the years, that's actually very good. it's on a par with the level of sharpness, not quite up there, that I get with the Fuji 30mm TS. Now, the 30mm, you can do anything with that, and it's really, really good. But as I say, so it should be for that much. But this, given how relatively cheap this lens is, you know, interesting. Right, so that's looked examples, issues and things. Yeah, what are my general conclusions about this lens? Quality-wise, sharpness, absolutely excellent. Little bit of barrel distortion, minimal, no real problem on it. Build quality, rock solid. The lens mount itself, the movements, yeah, they are. It's hand operated. You know, you haven't got gearing or anything on that. Well, that might be a problem or not. Certainly, when you compare it to the old TS-E17 there, with quite fine movements on it. Do you need those fine movements? I found experience tells me I often don't, and this is not too much of a problem to use. So, given the price of it, what's not to like? Well, we come to the elephant in the room. It has up and down shift only, no lens mount rotation, and the tilt is fixed at 90 degrees to the shift axis, which means that effectively you've only got left and right tilt or swing. Sure, you can use the camera that way round, in which case I could use the shift to take picture that direction, stitch them together, get a larger, even bigger image, but I've got no shift or anything like that in it. So for using that way, and also the tilt now does tilt up down, so I could use this for running a picture along the ground or something like that, but I've got this in portrait orientation. I might not want portrait orientation. The majority of my photos tend to be taken in landscape orientation, and I like to have a choice of it. So build quality, optics, really nice. Do I? In general, for medium format use, and remember that if you get the version of this for the RF mount, Z mount, E mount, if you get that, you do have the lens mount rotation. You've still got the 90 degree set offset between shift and tilt axes. That makes a big difference. Is this a showstopper? For me, I'm going to say no, because this lens, the quality of the images I get from it make it very useful for my architectural work. In particular, also given the state of my TS-E17. And that's going to cost a fair bit to get fixed. That's if the parts are available anymore. It's always a problem with good lenses after a few years. But what's not to like apart from that? Well, not a great deal. If you take pictures, mostly in landscape orientation, you want a wide-angle lens for the GFX here. This is a great 17mm wide-angle lens, F4. Gives really good results at f5.6. If you want shift, well, as long as you're just using normal shot and just using it to correct for verticals and things like that, it's great for that. Anything more, you're going to go no. These are limitations too far. These are things which are, it's a serious issue. So I see this, it depends on, one, whether you're a glass half full or half empty person, and one, what kind of photography you want to take with it. Would I use this in my work? Yeah, I would. Would every so often I be annoyed that I can't put it round the other direction and change? Yes, I would. But depends how much money you want to spend. Let's say this is a fraction of the price. Even a good used copy of this will set you back considerably more than one of these. TTArtisan, it makes some interesting lenses. Tilt-Shift 17mm f4. Great wide-angle lens. I will see at some point if I can actually have a look at the version of this for mirrorless mounts and see if I can see what the one is on the R5, in which case I think you then have, if you have that version on it, you have a very distinct competitor to this. I will be looking at other wide lenses and things for that, both on medium format and on 35mm as well. But yeah, if you've got any questions, let me know. I've got, say, examples, some nice examples of pictures here, which, none of these I particularly need for work, but it is nice knowing how easy this was to use at night, for example, handheld. If I need to go somewhere at night, I don't necessarily want to be walking around at night, setting up a tripod and doing things like that. Being able to take pictures like this for somebody, is useful. Anyway, hope that was of some interest. Say a bit longer than many of my videos, but my full reviews tend to be. Let me know what you think, and thanks for watching. Oh, and all the usual, please do like and subscribe and whatever. And I need to once more plug my book on tilt-shift lenses. It's how to use these things and get the best out of them. It's been just earlier this year been reprinted, which is a good sign. Either they didn't print enough to start with, or it sold out far better than they thought. I believe it sold fairly well. Anyway, there you go. Thanks for watching. Bye.